All right, let's just jump right in, because we are about to completely shatter your perception of reality. I want to introduce you to an invisible empire that is quite literally running the world behind the scenes. You probably walk around thinking of yourself as 100% human, right? Well, actually, scratch that. The wild truth is that microscopic life forms outnumber our own human cells by a whopping factor of 10. No way, right? But it's true. We are vastly outnumbered in our own bodies by organisms so tiny they are completely invisible to the naked eye. So, in today's explainer, we're going to unpack a beginner's guide to microbiology, pulling back the curtain on these unseen forces that dictate our health, our diseases, and honestly, the entire environment we live in.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll be exploring the invisible world, the pioneers of microbiology, classifying the microbes, our beneficial microorganisms, the harmful pathogens, and we'll wrap it all up with the microbial ecosystem.
Starting off with Section 1, the invisible world, life at the smallest scale. The word microbiology itself actually comes from Greek, meaning small, life, and science. Basically, it's the study of organisms that are typically 1 millimeter or less in diameter. And believe me, they are absolutely everywhere. We're talking extreme environments like boiling geothermal pools, freezing ice caps, the air we breathe, and yeah, billions of them are just hanging out in your digestive tract right at this very second.
Moving right along to Section 2, Pioneers of Microbiology, Seeing the Unseen.
Now, for most of human history, we were totally in the dark. People had absolutely no idea why diseases spread or why food spoiled. They just blame it on bad air or superstitions. But this timeline changes the whole game. In the 1670s, Antony van Leeuwenhoek actually spots what he calls little animals, using some rudimentary lenses. Then, jumping to the 1860s, Louis Pasteur officially disproves the crazy idea of spontaneous generation. And just a decade later, in the 1870s, Robert Koch hits the nail on the head and proves the germ theory, definitively showing that specific microbes cause specific diseases, a real game changer.
And it's incredibly cool to look at the actual tools that made this possible. We've got van Leeuwenhoek's early microscope design, which is essentially just a tiny lens mounted on a brass plate, but it was enough to first reveal those microbes. And then, check out Pasteur's super famous swan neck flask experiment. This was pure genius. Because the curved neck of the flask trapped dust particles but still let air flow in, the broth inside didn't spoil. It basically proved once and for all that life doesn't just magically poof into existence from thin air. It has to be physically introduced from the environment.
All right, on to Section 3, classifying the microbes, the 5 factions.
So if we look at the cellular level, microbes basically operate on 2 totally distinct floor plans. On one side of the coin, you have the prokaryotes. These are simpler. Think bacteria and cyanobacteria, and they lack a primordial membrane-bound nucleus. Simple but highly effective. On the flip side, you've got the eukaryotes, which are rocking a true defined nucleus. This group is a lot more complex and includes things like fungi, protozoa, and algae. Understanding this core structural divide is absolutely crucial for microbiologists when they're trying to identify and treat different organisms. And that brings us to the 5 main factions of microorganisms. Every single one of these has completely unique characteristics and plays a huge role in sustaining nature's balance. First, bacteria. These are single-celled, prokaryotic, and they show up everywhere, in shapes like rods, spheres, or spirals. Then we have viruses, which basically act as microscopic parasites. Next up, fungi. This ranges from the single-celled yeast we use for baking bread, all the way to complex molds that break down dead stuff. Fourth, we've got protozoa. These are animal-like, single-celled organisms that love hanging out in water and soil. And finally, algae. These are plant-like, photosynthetic powerhouses that are out there producing a massive chunk of the oxygen we breathe every day.
Now, out of those 5 factions, I really want to zoom in on viruses, because they are truly wild. Honestly, they're almost alien. They sit in the super weird gray area in biology where they aren't even technically considered living organisms. Crazy, right? Well, it's because they completely lack the internal machinery to reproduce by themselves. For a virus to multiply, it literally has to hijack a host cell and force it to do the work. And you can see how specialized they are just by looking at their physical structures. For example, bacteriophages look exactly like tiny robotic lunar landers perfectly designed to just inject their DNA into a cell. Then you've got rod-shaped ones, like the tobacco mosaic virus, and spherical ones like HIV. These diverse shapes, they aren't just for show. They are highly specialized precision tools built for cellular invasion.
Which brings us to Section 4, Beneficial Microorganisms, Our Invisible Allies.
It is so vital to connect these tiny abstract structures to their massive real-world impacts, because, spoiler alert, we literally could not survive without them. Right now, inside your gut, probiotics are working hard to digest tough fibers, extract essential nutrients, and supercharge your immune system. Out in the wild, decomposer fungi are constantly recycling dead organic matter back into nutrient-rich soil. In the oceans, cyanobacteria and algae are pumping out the oxygen we need to stay alive. And industrially, we are putting bacteria to work. We use them to clean up toxic oil spills, generate biogas for electricity, and we even use specific strains like Streptomyces to manufacture the antibiotics that save millions of lives.
But of course, there's another side to the story. Section 5, harmful pathogens, the disease makers.
This is where we see the biological tightrope we walk every single day. We've got our good microbes, like the probiotics keeping our guts happy, the Streptomyces churning out antibiotics, and the phytoplankton giving us oxygen. But then, on the exact opposite side, we have pathogenic microbes aiming to take us down. We're talking about salmonella causing terrible foodborne illnesses, viruses like HIV absolutely devastating the immune system, and protozoa like Plasmodium, which is the culprit behind malaria. It's a constant push and pull.
These pathogens, like the rotavirus we're looking at here, are just incredibly efficient at what they do, and they cause disease through a few main strategies. Sometimes they just directly damage the host cells. Other times they produce these incredibly powerful, toxic chemicals called endotoxins. Or, in some cases, they just trigger such a massive, severe immune response that the host ends up accidentally destroying its own cells trying to fight back. It is a literal microscopic war zone in there.
Finally, let's wrap this up with Section 6, the microbial ecosystem, a delicate balance. The big takeaway here is that we humans are constantly navigating this vast, invisible ecosystem. We are quite literally surrounded in the air, the water, the dirt, and yes, right inside our own bodies. And because those harmful pathogens are always lurking out there, we rely so heavily on our beneficial microbes to compete for space and resources, to produce defensive compounds, and to keep the bad actors in check. It's this delicate, incredibly complex, ongoing ecological balance that ultimately dictates our own personal health and the health of the entire planet.
So I want to leave you with this thought. When you look in the mirror, you obviously see a human, but biologically speaking, microbes outnumber your own human cells 10 to 1. Considering they regulate your digestion, power your immunity, and even provide the very air you breathe, are we actually just hosts living in a microbial world? I really hope this explainer sparked your curiosity to keep exploring this fascinating, invisible universe.